She was 34 years old and she had $10 left. Not $10 left after bills, $10 left, total, in the world, folded in half in the back pocket of jeans she'd been wearing for 3 days. Her name was Carla Dean, and 6 months before that morning she had owned a catering business with 8 employees, a lease on a commercial kitchen in Savannah, Georgia, and a 5-year plan written in a spiral notebook she still had somewhere in a storage unit she could no longer afford to keep. A kitchen fire had taken the lease. A lawsuit had taken the business. Her business partner, a woman she had trusted for 9 years, her closest friend in the world, had taken what remained, quietly, over the course of the lawsuit's final weeks, in a series of account transfers that Carla's lawyer had explained to her in a voice calibrated very carefully to be professional rather than pitying. By the time it was over, there was nothing to divide, because there was nothing left. Carla had signed the last of the paperwork on a Tuesday morning and driven to a gas station and sat in her car for 45 minutes and then driven to the marina on the Wilmington River, because she didn't have anywhere else particular to be. The houseboat was at the end of slip 17. It had been there, she would later learn, for 4 years without moving. It sat low in the water on the left side, a list so gradual you might not notice it if you weren't looking, and its hull was the color that metal goes when it has been in saltwater air for decades without enough attention. Someone had painted the cabin white at some point, and the paint had gone gray and was lifting at the edges in long curling strips. The name on the stern was still just readable, Marigold. She had been told the price was $10. She thought that was about right. What nobody at that marina knew, what nobody in Savannah had thought to look for in the 4 years that houseboat had been sitting in slip 17, was what was stored in the compartment below the forward deck, behind a panel that had been sealed so carefully and for so long that it had become, to all appearances, part of the hull itself. Something that a woman named June Harlow had put there in 1987, the year before she disappeared from Savannah so completely that most people had eventually stopped wondering where she'd gone. What Carla found in that compartment would change everything she thought she understood about luck, and about loss, and about the particular stubbornness of a life that refuses to be finished. If this is the kind of story you need today, go ahead and hit subscribe and come along. We'd love to have you here. And drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. It always means something to us to know. Carla had not always been broke at 34. She had been, from the age of 26, a person who built things carefully and with intention. A person who wrote down the steps and followed them, who understood food and hospitality and the specific art of making people feel taken care of at the right moment. Her catering business had started as a 2-woman operation out of a rented kitchen in a church basement in Savannah's Midtown on Sunday mornings when the church wasn't using it, and she had grown it methodically. One good event, then another, then a reputation. Then the commercial kitchen on Habersham Street with the 6-burner range and the walk-in cooler she had been so proud of she had stood in it for a full minute the first day, just to feel the cold. Then 8 employees, a booking calendar that ran 16 weeks out, a name that people mentioned without being asked when they were planning something that mattered. She had done it right. She had been proud of it, quietly, in the way you're proud of something you built from the ground up with your own hands and your own persistence and very little outside help. She had never taken a bank loan. She had never taken on an investor for the equity, only for the work. The work was the thing. Her business partner's name was Diane Marsh. They had met in culinary school in Charleston and had been friends, real friends, the kind you call first with good news and bad news both, the kind who know the story behind every decision you've made, for 9 years before they went into business together, and 4 years after that before the kitchen fire changed everything. The fire itself was an accident. No question about that, ever. But the months after the fire, when the insurance claim was disputed and the lawsuit came from the building's owner and the legal fees mounted, and the business account began to diminish in ways Carla could see clearly in the monthly statements, those months were not an accident. Diane had access to the accounts. Diane had been a signatory since the beginning, since the church basement days, because that was what trust looked like between them then. It turned out that trust, given enough pressure and enough quiet opportunity, had a different shape than Carla had believed. The transfers were small enough individually to seem like operational expenses. They added up to $41,000 over 14 weeks. Carla's lawyer found them during discovery. Diane's lawyer said they had been authorized. There was a document, apparently, that Carla had signed at some point, authorizing certain expense transfers, and the document was either falsified or Carla had signed something she hadn't read carefully enough, and she would never be entirely certain which was its own kind of wound. The lawsuit was settled. Diane paid back a portion. The business did not survive the settlement. Carla did not survive it with anything except the jeans and the $10 and the spiral notebook in the storage unit, and a very specific education in what can happen when you trust someone completely. She did not go home to her mother. Her mother was in Tallahassee and was the kind of woman who managed difficulty by distributing it evenly across everyone within reach, and Carla did not have the reserves for that. She did not call her friends, because she had, over the 4 years of building the business, allowed most of her friendships to thin to the kind that couldn't hold real weight. You don't notice this happening while it's happening. You notice it after. She drove to the marina because it was where she had gone, years before, when she needed to think. There was a diner at the marina entrance, open early, with good coffee and booths that tolerated a person sitting for a long time. She had been to this diner perhaps a dozen times over the years, not recently. The woman who worked the morning counter remembered her, which surprised Carla more than it should have. Her name was Bet, the kind of name that belongs to a woman of a certain age who has been working the same counter for a long time and knows everything that happens within a half-mile radius. Bet brought the coffee and said, without particular ceremony, "You look like you've had a time of it." Carla said she had. Bet said the houseboat at the end of Slip 17 had been for sale for a while. She said the harbor office had the information. She said this the way you say something that is both casual and precise, which is to say she said it carefully while appearing not to. The harbor office was a wooden building at the edge of the dock, with a fan in the window and a bulletin board with notices pinned to it. The man at the desk was named Ray, and he was in his 60s, and he had the specific patience of a man who spends his days dealing with boats, and the people who love boats beyond all reasonable justification. He told Carla about the houseboat. It had been abandoned in the slip after the previous owner, a man named Carson Pruitt, had died without heirs and without a clear will. The estate had gone to a distant cousin who had no interest in a houseboat and who had eventually agreed to release it to the marina for disposal at any price, just to close the matter. The slip fee arrears had been forgiven. The asking price was $10. Carla asked what condition it was in. Ray looked at her over his reading glasses and said, "It floats." He said it in a way that was honest rather than encouraging, which she appreciated. She walked down to Slip 17 and stood on the dock and looked at the Marigold for a long time. The list to the left was about 4 degrees. She could correct that with ballast redistribution if the hull was sound, which was something she knew because she had once catered a function on a boat and had spent 2 hours talking to the captain about exactly this kind of problem. The way you absorb information when it's being offered by someone who knows what they're doing. The paint was gone in many places, but the cabin structure looked intact. The windows were intact. The transom had some rot she could see from the dock, but not deep rot, not structural. The engine, she found out later the engine was a complete write-off, but the hull was fiberglass beneath the steel frame elements, and fiberglass, treated right, is nearly indestructible. She paid $10. Ray wrote her a receipt. She slept on the Marigold that first night in a sleeping bag she had in her car, on the forward bunk, which was musty but level. She listened to the water against the hull and the creak of the dock lines, and she thought about what she had and what she didn't have, and what could be done. She was a person who, when faced with a problem, made a list. She got up at 5 in the morning and found a legal pad in the glove compartment of her car and sat at the galley table in the gray early light and made a list. The list took 2 pages. She began with what she knew. She could cook. She could run a kitchen. She had a food handler's certification that was still current. She had a reputation in Savannah that had taken a serious hit from the lawsuit and the dissolution of the business, but that had not been destroyed, because she had not done anything wrong, and people who had worked with her knew that. She had no money and no kitchen, and no business license, and a houseboat that needed significant work. She had a marina full of people who might need feeding. She started with the marina. Bet at the diner, it turned out, was not the owner. She was the morning manager. And the owner was a man named Lou who came in at 10 and who had the distracted, permanently calculating look of a person running a thin margin operation. Carla introduced herself and made her pitch directly. She would cater the marina's monthly dock party, which Bet had mentioned in passing, for cost of ingredients only, no charge for labor, in exchange for use of the diner's kitchen on Sunday mornings when the diner was closed. Lou looked at her for a long moment and said that sounded like a bad deal for her. She said she needed the kitchen access more than she needed the money right now, which was true, and that the dock party would demonstrate what she could do, which was also true. Lou said all right. The dock party was for 60 people. She fed 83 and had nothing left over. By the following Monday, she had 4 inquiries about private catering events. She called Ray at the harbor office and asked what permits she would need to operate a floating food business out of Slip 17. Ray listed them. She wrote them down. She had been living on the Marigold for 3 weeks when she found the compartment. She was doing what she had been doing every evening after the marina's social hours ended, working on the boat. She had gotten the list down from the engine and the ballast and was into the interior work now, resealing, repainting, replacing the bunk cushions with material from a fabric discount warehouse on Abercorn Street. She was working on the forward cabin bulkhead, which had some delamination along the lower edge, pressing it back and getting adhesive under it, when she noticed that the panel at the base of the bulkhead, a panel that appeared to be a structural element of the forward bilge compartment, was not. In fact, structural, it was mounted very carefully, with screws that had been painted over so many times they had become nearly flush with the surface. You wouldn't see it unless you were 6 inches away with your hand on it in good light, which she was. She got a screwdriver. The screws turned, slowly with some persuasion. The panel came away. Behind it was a compartment, roughly 2 feet by 3, lined with marine-grade rubber sheeting that had done its job. The interior was dry, completely dry, in a boat that had been sitting in a Georgia marina for 4 years. On the rubber sheeting, arranged with obvious intention, were 4 items. Now, if you're still with me, I'd love it if you'd hit subscribe before we go any further. We're right at the moment everything changes, and I want you here for it. The first item was a waterproof document case, the kind with a gasket seal and a locking zipper, olive green, the kind you'd take camping in wet conditions. Inside it were documents, a deed to a piece of property on Tybee Island, a small parcel, a little over half an acre, on the marsh side, and a letter, handwritten on a single page, addressed to whoever is living on this boat. The second item was a metal cash box, locked, with a key taped to the bottom of it with electrical tape. The third item was a photograph in a frame, glass intact, showing a woman on the deck of the Marigold, younger, painted better, sitting in better water, with a smile that was private rather than performed. The smile of someone being photographed by someone they trusted. The fourth item was a mason jar, sealed, labeled in neat script, June's Gumbo Base, 1987, good for 20 years. Use it well. The key opened the cash box. Inside, in rubber-banded stacks that had kept their integrity in the dry compartment, were $12,000 in mixed bills, mostly hundreds and fifties, with a note on top in the same handwriting as the jar label, "This is for whoever needs a start. Don't pay it back. Pay it forward." Carla sat on the forward bunk with the cash box on her knees and the letter in her hand, and read it twice, slowly, in the way you read something when you want to be sure you are not misunderstanding it, and then she set it down and looked out the port window at the marina lights on the water, and sat like that for some time. June Harlow had bought the Marigold in 1979 with money she had earned over 6 years waitressing and doing alterations for a tailor on Broughton Street. She had lived on the boat for 9 years, cooking her way through Savannah's catering and private dinner circuit, with a reputation that the letter described matter-of-factly. She had fed the right people at the right moments, and she had done it better than anyone else available, and people had known it. She had saved carefully, bought the Tybee Island parcel in 1985 with the intention of building something on it eventually, and had spent the following 2 years getting the parcel permitted and planned. In 1988, a man she had been in business with, a restaurant partner who had the liquor license and the location, and who had been, she wrote, someone she trusted as completely as she had ever trusted anyone, had taken the business and the savings and the majority of the Tybee Island property's value in a legal maneuver that her own lawyer had not caught in time. She had kept the parcel, barely. She had kept the Marigold, barely. She had started over at 41, with $12,000 she had kept in cash, in the compartment, because she did not trust banks anymore after what had happened, and she had decided to leave and start fresh somewhere else. She had sealed the compartment before she went and left the money and the deed in it, because she had, by the time she was ready to leave, more than she needed and less attachment to money than she'd once had, and she thought it would be better to leave it for someone who arrived at the Marigold broke and serious and ready to work, rather than take it with her to a new life that was going to be fine regardless. She'd been feeding people her whole life, she wrote. One more person felt right. Don't pay it back. Pay it forward. Carla sat with the letter for a long time. Outside, the marina made its night sounds, the lines shifting, the water against the hull. Someone's radio too slips over, low and indistinct. Fig scratched at something in the galley. The gumbo-based jar caught the light from the port window. June had put it there in 1987, 37 years ago, by a woman who had been in almost exactly the same position Carla was in now, with the same wound and the same 10 fingers and the same refusal to stop. She called an attorney the next morning about the Tybee Island deed. The parcel was still in June Harlow's name. There had been no transfer, no sale, no activity on record since 1987. The attorney, a woman named Frances who specialized in property law and who had a practical, no-drama manner that Carla found immediately trustworthy, said the parcel was small, but the location on the marsh side of Tybee Island was now, 37 years on, worth considerably more than it would have been when June had bought it. Development pressure in that corridor had been building for a decade. She said getting clear title transferred would take some time and some work, locating June Harlow or her heirs, or establishing abandonment, but that the path was navigable. It took 7 months. Frances navigated it. June Harlow had, it emerged, moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1989 and had died in Portland in 2019 at the age of 72. She had no living children. Her estate had been settled by a nephew who had not known about the Tybee Island parcel, which had never been included in the Portland estate filing because no one had thought to look for Georgia property. Frances filed the appropriate motions. The nephew, once located, signed the necessary documents with no resistance and evident relief to have the matter resolved. Title cleared on a Thursday morning in October, and Frances called Carla at the marina to tell her, and Carla was sitting on the Marigold's rear deck in the October warmth, eating breakfast, and she said thank you, and hung up and looked at the marsh for a while. The marina knew her by then. 4 months will do that in a close community of people who live on boats or work around them. People who notice things and remember them, and form judgments that are slow to form and hard to change, which means they are worth having. Ray at the harbor office had recommended her twice for private events on boats he harbored. That had become, without any ceremony about it, something between a friend and an ally. She passed along information and contacts, and the specific kind of practical help that comes from knowing a place deeply and being generous with that knowledge. Lou had extended the kitchen arrangement to 3 mornings a week after the dock party had gone the way it went. There was a man named Shepard, retired marine carpenter, 70 years old, a slipholder at the marina for 12 years, who had helped Carla with the Marigold's hull work one Saturday in September because he had seen her doing it wrong and couldn't watch without intervening. He came down the dock without introduction, looked at what she was doing, said, "You'll want to work with the grain, not against it," and picked up the second tool. He was not a demonstrative man. He was precise and methodical, and he worked without explaining himself unless asked, which she found she respected immediately and said so, which he acknowledged with a short nod and no other response. They worked for 4 hours and got the port side hull section done properly. When they finished, she asked what she owed him, and he said nothing, that he'd had nothing better to do, which they both understood was not entirely true, because she had seen his slip and his boat and his routine for 6 weeks, and he was not a man who ran out of things to do. She made him dinner on the Marigold the following Sunday, gumbo, from a recipe she had built herself over the years, approximating what she imagined June's 1987 base had been the foundation of, because she had not opened the jar and did not intend to. Not yet. It wasn't time. Shepard ate 2 bowls and said it was very good, and that was the entirety of the review, and she understood that 2 bowls from a man like Shepard was the equivalent of a standing ovation from anyone else. He came back the following Saturday without being asked. He said there were 2 things on the forward deck that weren't right, and he wanted to fix them. She handed him the tools, and they worked another 4 hours, and she made coffee, and he told her, in the careful way he told things, about the marina's history, which boats had been here longest, which slips had stories, what the Wilmington River had looked like 15 years ago before the development crept closer. He mentioned June Harlow without knowing he was doing it, referring to a houseboat that had sat in Slip 17 many years back, with a woman who ran a small private dinner service off the deck. He said she had been well regarded. He said she had disappeared one summer, and nobody had known where she went. He said, matter-of-factly, that she had made a gumbo worth remembering. He said this, and then went back to the work, and Carla sat very still for a moment, and then went back to the work too. The Tybee Island parcel. She had looked at it once in person, walking the perimeter with Frances in August while the title work was ongoing, on a morning when the marsh was doing the thing marshes do in early August in coastal Georgia. The light on the water so particular and so specific to that hour and that place that she had stopped walking and just looked for a moment. The parcel was half an acre of marsh-edge land with spartina grass along the water boundary and a stand of live oaks at the back. There was nothing on it, cleared at some point, and never built upon, which meant the soil near the roadside had recovered. She had stood at the marsh edge and thought about what you could build on a piece of ground like this that would make the most of what it was rather than impose something foreign on it. A small structure, open on the waterside. A kitchen worth the name. Tables outside under the oaks if the weather was right, which in Savannah it often was, 9 months in 12. Something that fed people the way she had always fed people, carefully, with intention, without pretension. She had been thinking about that ever since. She thought about it while she was running the dock catering. She thought about it while she was reading June's letter for the 4th time. And the 5th. She thought about it while Shepard was fixing the things on the forward deck that weren't right. She thought about it the way you think about something that is not yet real, but is becoming real, gaining weight and detail, the way a plan does when it has the right foundation under it. Diane Marsh had, by the time all of this happened, moved to Atlanta. Carla knew this from mutual connections in the Savannah catering world, which was not large and which had not been kind to Diane's reputation once the details of the settlement became generally known. People talk. Carla had not done the talking. She had not said anything directly to anyone, but the lawsuit had been a matter of public record, and public records get read and discussed in small professional communities. And by the time Carla was sitting on a functioning houseboat in a marina where she had become a known and trusted person, Diane was starting over in a city where nobody knew her name yet. Carla heard this third hand, mentioned in passing by Bet, who mentioned it without emphasis, which was Bet's way of saying she didn't want to make more of it than necessary. Carla said nothing. There was nothing to say that would have added to anything. She opened June's gumbo base on a November evening. She had decided to wait until she had something worth celebrating. And she had decided, on reflection, that she did. The jar opened with the clean sound of a good seal releasing. The base had darkened over the years, but the smell was right. Deep and roux forward, and specific in the way of something made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She heated it slowly, added her own stock, built it out. She fed Bet and Ray and Shepard and Lou and Francis and Gus, the mechanic from Slip 22, and Helen from the diner, and 4 people from the dock whose names she had learned in the way you learn names at a marina, through proximity and repetition, and they sat on the Marigold's rear deck in the November cool with the lights of the marina around them, and ate 2 pots of gumbo, and nobody asked where the base came from, and she didn't volunteer it, because some things belong to the moment and are better not explained. She had been feeding people her whole life. That was what June had written. One more person felt right. Carla thought about that for the rest of the evening, and for many evenings after it. She thought about what it meant to be the one more person. She thought about what it would mean, eventually to be the person who left something behind for whoever came next. She thought about a woman who had been in almost exactly her position, same wound, same industry, same steady refusal to stop, and who had ended up in Portland and had lived to 72 and had never come back for the money or the land, had simply left them in the dark for whoever arrived next with $10 and a serious face and somewhere to be. She thought about what that kind of generosity required. Not money. June had had money to spare by then. It required a specific orientation, the belief that the person coming after you mattered as much as you did, that the story did not end with you, that the right thing to do with a windfall that arrived after suffering was to make sure it could keep moving. Don't pay it back. Pay it forward. She was 34 when she found the marigold. She had $10 and a legal pad and a list 2 pages long and more damage than she could have fully measured at the time. She paid $10 and signed her name and went aboard in the dark and listened to the water and got up at 5 in the morning and made the list. She had a marina full of people who might need feeding. It turned out that was enough to start with. It turned out that had always been enough to start with. And what she found below deck was not only what June Harlow had preserved in a dry compartment for 37 years. It was the proof that a woman with nothing but skill and stubbornness and the willingness to get up at 5 in the morning and make the list can find her way back to something solid. Because someone who came before her and survived the same thing made sure the door was still open. If you've ever been handed something by someone who didn't have to hand it to you, a stranger's kindness, an unexpected door that opened, a letter meant for exactly you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Just where you were and what it was. That's the part that matters. Subscribe if this story stayed with you. And if you know someone who's in a slip 17 moment, broke and serious and looking at something that doesn't look like much yet, share this with them. It cost nothing. June Harlow would have approved. See you in the next one.